Okay, so I'm better at standing still than they are. So hopefully I won't drop this in the water. Okay, so I want to start with asking you by a show of hands, it's a group participation thing. Who is in favor of students?
Yeah.
Hopefully, since you're all teachers, yes. Anybody opposed? Okay, when I talk to the students, I usually start the same way, and the reason that I do that is just to kind of get a feeling for it, because sometimes the kids are of the opinion that because it's a rule, they have to do what they're told. But there's some things that went on behind the case that really aren't actual public knowledge, other than Mary Beth and John have heard me ramble, and David and Roger about this, that actually happened that aren't out there. So we're going to talk about that. So like I said last night, in first semester in journalism, I was a junior, and we were going to learn about how to be a journalist. And I thought that was going to be fun because I like to write. So we learned about prior restraint, and they told us about, if you do these things and you follow the rules as you should, that you're going to be okay. That they can't just, if you write something, they just can't take it away. So basically, in my mind, that meant they can't censor us. I thought, okay, no big deal. And then we also learned about Tinker versus Des Moines, and you've heard very much so today on a wonderful job from John and Mary Beth about students and teachers do not shed their right at schoolhouse gate. And for some reason, those two things, they really stood out to me, and little did I know why, within a few months, why that was going to be so relevant to me. And we decided we wanted to do something a little more powerful and hopefully impactful than what the typical stories were in our school, because they wrote about who was going to be most likely to succeed kind of thing, and who won the football game, which if you guys think back right now as adults, does it matter how good your football team was or who your main cheerleaders were? I could care less, even then and especially now. But that's what kind of stories we did. And we identified a problem in our school, and apparently it had been a problem years before. And this is kind of, to me, I think, an important part that should have been brought out by our attorney, but it wasn't. Previous years before, we were underneath a different principal, and his name was Dr. Negri, and he allowed the same story topics to be run. So fast forward now 5 years underneath Mr. Reynolds, our new principal, we're doing these topics. So you would think, in my mind, that 5 years into the future now, that these shouldn't be a big deal, right? Because times have advanced, it's still an issue. We should be able to talk about it. So we went into the morgue of this school, and we had all the files that we want to talk about. We reviewed and we found the stories that they ran about teenage pregnancy, divorce, marriage, runaways, and the squeal rule. And our advisor was Mr. Sturgis, and we thought everything of him. And hopefully you guys are the kind of teachers that your kids are inspired by, that you think really, they think you hung the world. And that's how we felt about Mr. Sturgis. He was everything. We believed him, that he said, these are good ideas, guys, let's do it. So we did. In the teen pregnancy story, we had a vast population of students there, enough that warranted having a daycare in our school. Think about that in the 80s. That's pretty forward, isn't it? So it was a large school, but the teen pregnancy problem was definitely an issue. So we interviewed out of this population of probably 40 girls that were pregnant, and we selected 3. And the 3 that we chose was based upon the fact that each of their stories was different. One girl thought everything was super, this is the best thing ever, I'm going to have a baby. To me, I can't imagine having a baby as a teenager. That would scare the bejesus out of me. I didn't have my daughter until I was 28. And even at that point, as a older mom, I thought, what in the world am I doing? I don't know what to do with this kid. There's no directions. So as a teenager, I can't imagine that. The other girl thought, okay, well, it happened, and I have to be an adult now, and I have to deal with it. It was a conscious choice that I made to be sexually active. This is a consequence of it. I'm going to raise my child. The third girl was devastated. She was like, this is the worst thing I've ever done. what in the world was I thinking? So we talked to the girls, and we got their inputs. One of the things that wasn't ever mentioned also that I think is probably a big deal that could have been a swaying factor had it been presented, is that we talked to the girls, they signed their statements. They had their consent. We also thought enough that, because they're minors, let's get the parental consent. So we asked the girls, take what you signed, take it home, let your parents look at it. If everything is accurate, ask your parents to sign it also. So we're being responsible, right? We're not just willy-nilly flying by the seat of our pants. Write a story. We were responsible. In the story about divorce, my own father was part of it. My parents split up because of the fact that my father was an alcoholic. To the point that he was so bad of an alcoholic. I played soccer in high school. Didn't do it very well, but I played soccer. And our soccer coach lived in our subdivision. And we were one of the subdivisions that had a little median through the center of it. He came home one night so lit up that he crossed the median and he put his car into my soccer coach's house. Now, don't you think the next day when I went to school what the news is and they're talking about me. So that was one of the things we talked about in there also. We had quotes from my father about what it was like, quotes from my mother, quotes from me, and we signed off on it. Everybody agreed. Again, trying to be the responsible kids, right? So, I mean, if you give you the kind of mindset, it's not like in a journalism class, you're getting, some of the schools, I'm sure probably everywhere, you have some of the kids that are just there because they have to. Generally in a journalism class, you've got a little bit of the higher working and higher functioning kids. There's a lot that goes into being in a journalism class. So you've got to put the effort forth. So you've got those higher quality kids. And I'm fortunate enough to say mine's one of those. Like I said last night, my son's going to be the editor-in-chief of our news magazine at his school. And I'm so very proud of him that he wants to pursue after mama. So that's kind of where we were going with it. There were other quotes in there about why parents split up because one father was cheating. But again, we go back to the signatures, which to us as teenagers, we're being responsible. In the runaway story, we gave hotline numbers. If you're considering running away, here's some numbers. Rethink it. Is it really worth it? And I think out of all of this, that's one of the hardest things that I have a hard time that I still struggle with accepting. There was a kid that I went to high school with. His name was Reggie Jones, and Reggie ran away. When I was in high school, I worked for Target. I was a Targeteer. And for whatever reason, Reggie ran away, and he went to Target, and in Target's restroom, committed suicide. And I can't help but think, if Reggie read that paper, would it have made a difference? If it helped one person, isn't that what we're supposed to do? We want to make a difference. We want to make things better. We knew going into this it wasn't going to impact every single person. Every person wasn't going to deal with teen pregnancy or getting married in high school or running away. But we can help somebody. That's why we're doing it. That's what it's about. So we get the articles all set and everything's ready, and I'm the layout editor. And if you guys, I don't have fun things to sign like Mary Beth does. She's way cooler than I am. But if you go to Google Images, this is what the paper was going to look like. This is the mock-up of our paper. So this is everything, the way it's going to look. We sent it off to the printer back in the old school days, and you're supposed to come back with the full paper. That didn't happen. When we got the paper back, it was missing that center spread. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, it's going to come in an hour, it's going to come the next day, and we're going to insert it. Shouldn't be a big deal. We're going to sell the paper. Excuse me. That's not the case. So that time goes by, and we go and we talk to Mr. Reynolds, and we say, where's this at? What happened? Sturgis told us there's a problem. Fill us in. So we go down there as a group. There was a lot more of us than actually what ended up being in the case. I'm not the only actual litigant that was in the case. There's two other girls, but I won my case being on, or my name being on it. I'm first alphabetically. But Leanne Tippett and Leslie Smart are also litigants that remained in the case with us. So there were about 8 of us that went down to Mr. Reynolds' office, and we said, tell us what happened. And he said, well, here's the thing, is that the articles that you guys wrote are too mature for an immature audience. And I said, okay, super. I said, so like I told you last night, if you're old enough to get pregnant, shouldn't you be old enough to read about it? That wasn't a fan favorite in the comments. So then he makes a comment, well, I can personally identify these things. So I had our little mock-up when we went down there. And I said, perfect, who is this? If you can see this, this is a little ghosting of a pregnant girl. I said, who is that? And he throws out there a name. And I said, is that right? I said, well, let me tell you how easy it is to create a pregnancy without a guy. All you have to do is roll up a sweater, shove it underneath your shirt, and ta-da, you're pregnant. That's me. I am not pregnant. So he didn't like that either. I wasn't particularly concerned. But it was the fact of the matter that we worked hard. We thought the articles were good. They were good quality articles. We wanted them to run. We wanted to make a difference. So he says, well, it's not going to happen. If you guys don't sell this paper as it stands, you're not going to have a senior issue. And the senior issue was dedicated to most likely to succeed, who's the funniest, the cutest couple. We didn't want to take that away from the seniors. So those of us that decided we weren't going to sell the paper, forget it, sat in the classroom, we're not going to do it. The seniors were the ones that went and sold it, except for Leanne. And so we're sitting in the classroom and we're thinking, plotting. Right, so they had their meeting about, we're going to wear the armbands. We're plotting what's our next move. And we decide that we're going to call Sturgis. Through all of this going on, Sturgis left us. I guess apparently there was some butting of the heads between Sturgis and Reynolds. So he left and he went into private industry. Devastated us. We got one of those substitute teachers that hopefully you guys don't ever get. They're truly a babysitter. She had a hard time putting on lipstick. That's what she would do in our class. She had no journalism background. She would sit there and just draw on her face. God love her. She didn't draw on her face well. She looked like a little clown by the time it was all said and done, but that was her purpose. So then they decided it's going to be a good idea, maybe because she's not doing such a good job at advising us, that they're going to bring in Mr. Emerson. And Mr. Emerson is the advisor from Hazelwood Central, which is our rival. I'm at Hazelwood East, he's at Central. So I'm like, okay, what's the deal? But he's going to guide us through. So when he does so, it's his practice that he's going to take things to Reynolds for review, and then Reynolds has that opportunity to say, no, we're not going to run those. So that's how it got to that point of them just not running. So as we're sitting in class and we're plotting what the next move is, I said, well, let's call Sturgis. So we did. And so in Hazelwood East, we didn't have classroom walls. We weren't restricted. It was an open forum. And our classroom was in the library, so, you're not supposed to leave class, right? It's the right thing to do. We talked about we're supposed to stay. Well, since I was already having a moment that day, I snuck out of class because the substitute didn't notice. She was kind of wrapped up still with the lipstick. I snuck out of class and I went over to the library where there was a phone and I called Sturgis. And I'm a little worked up at that point. And I said, here's what just happened. I said, what should we do? And he said, well, what led up to this? And I said, Emerson came, he gave it to Reynolds. Reynolds said no, didn't like it. We're not smart enough, intelligent enough to understand getting pregnant and what have you. He says, well, let me tell you something. And I said, okay. Because I'm all ears. I want to know what we're going to do, because by God, we're going to run these articles. And he says, I would recommend that you contact the ACLU. Now, at 17 and in high school, they didn't make a difference in my world, and I quite honestly didn't know what they did, but I said, okay. So I went back to the classroom and I told the other kids, here's what Sturgis says. And he was that teacher, like I said, that we believed in. So because he said so, therefore we are. So we contacted the ACLU. We went home and talked to our parents first, and they said, sure. My mother, God love her soul, was a little rabble-rouser, and I think I probably know now where I've gotten it from. But she said, I'll support you on that. And Leslie and Leanne's parents also supported them. So it ended up being the three of us. The actual editor-in-chief of the paper, her parents were very concerned of what could come. And the reason for that was because the day before all of this went on and we went to the ACLU, we were told that if we pursued anything further, there would be further repercussions. There was, back in the days of the typewriter, an anonymous note that appeared on a chalkboard that told us we could not pursue this. What are you gonna do? Unless you test it out, right? So we tested the waters and we contacted them, and the ACLU was very interested in it, and they picked the case up immediately. They said, I believe you guys have been wronged. It is a First Amendment violation, we'll take the case. So they decided to hire Leslie Edwards as our attorney, and she was a new attorney at the time. And I think, honestly, this was probably a bigger step than what she was ready for. But that's who we were dealt. So throughout all the time, you know, when a case hits the court and they decide to pick things up, what do you think media-wise happens? Do you think it's something that's kind of hush-hush, or do you think maybe publications pick it up? Well, in St. Louis, Missouri, it became a very big deal very quickly. And I got to be interviewed by every major news feed out there. And also Phil Donahue, and of those of you that are not quite as an antique as what I am, Phil Donahue was the Oprah of the 80s. And so he called us and said, would you like to come on Phil Donahue? Sure, it's a trip to Chicago. We're up for it. So we go to Chicago, and it's Leslie and Leanne and I, and we were worried that there was going to be a sweet little grandma in the audience and say, well, back in my day, we didn't do those things. Well, guess who was in the audience but Grandma? And of course, the camera is on my happy face, and I rolled my eyes because we had just had this conversation. So my mother was then mortified that, you know, it's captured on TV of me going, there she is. So when I go back to school now, do you think Mr. Reynolds is very pleased with me? The answer would be definitely no. I got a personal invitation to come and visit with him in his office. And he told me that if you, again, try anything like this, I will expel you. I thought, for real? But my mom said I could go. I had a note. I gave it to your secretary, and if my mom says I can be absent, then therefore it shall be. But no, that's not okay. Now, let me give you a background on the kind of student I was. I was in band. I was the band nerd. I played the clarinet. So then, therefore, I was in orchestra in the pit crews. I, as I said, attempted to play soccer. I was in National Honor Society, and I had never, ever even had detention. But now I might be expelled because I was being a big girl and standing up for something. It wasn't quite all clicking to me, but I wasn't afraid. So, at this point, I graduated high school, and I have this wonderful picture that I'm really embarrassed by of when I graduate high school, Mr. Reynolds is doing this. And I'm all, look at me, I'm graduating. And his head is turned the other direction. He wouldn't even acknowledge me. Now, my friends through high school, some of them we talked about with Mary Beth on how things went, that some of your friends think, yeah, cool. Some of my friends thought it was the best thing ever, and they fully supported me, and they made me a shirt that I wore underneath my gown that said shit disturber. And I really wanted to flash when I went across the stage, but my mother was in the audience, and I was afraid of her. What was going to happen when I got home, not him. Because I knew I would be in trouble with my mama for expressing my freedom of speech. And somewhere in my house or in the storage unit is that shirt. Mary Beth keeps telling me I need to send it to the museum. But I don't know if they would like that. So that's what I wore. But I had a lot of mixed feelings that went on with my fellow classmates that were like, why are you bringing all this attention to school? What's the deal? And some of my professors back then were awesome. And especially Mr. Moore in chemistry. Like I mentioned, we had open classrooms, so there was just like a half wall. Well, Reynolds became my very personal friend, and he wanted to make sure every day that I was going to school and that I was in the classroom. So every single day of my high school life for the last 2 years, he would come and make sure that I was in class. And every day Mr. Moore would go, she's here, leave her alone. But then some of the teachers would be like, are you gonna cause problems today? I'm like, when have I caused a problem? I just happen to want to talk about what our teen pregnancy problem is. And I really think that part of the issue with Reynolds not running it is because he was new principal. He didn't want to expose to the community because the community could pick up on our paper and read it. He didn't want them to know kids were pregnant in Hazelwood. Shh, don't tell that secret. It's true, but it's happening. And I think that's part of it. He also made the comment that he personally paid for it. Really? Show me your checkbook. Seeing is believing. Remember, I'm a Missouri girl. Truth be known, we had to pay a whopping 25 cents to buy the Spectrum. It cost us. So he wasn't personally paying for anything. So all of this has gone on, and I've now graduated, like I said, and I've made it to college. And it's our attorney at that point in time, we didn't have cell phones, because again, it was the olden days. So I didn't know it was actually making its way to the Supreme Court. I didn't get to go. Never found out that it was happening. I actually went and saw the U.S. Supreme Court with Mary Beth when we go to D.C. just a few years ago. I've been sheltered and not been in the building, even though my case went there. So in Missouri, we lost, and then we won in the appellate courts, and then unfortunately, we lost the actual decision. And the way that I found that out was in my senior year of college in January. I got a phone call from a Southeast Missourian reporter asking, what's your opinion on your decision of losing the case? And I said, excuse me, said what? I don't think I have anything that I can say nicely right now, because I was pretty devastated. Because I really thought that we had a chance of winning this because we had won in the appellates. And then to come to find out, no, we lost a decision of 5-3. Now, had it tied at 4-4, we would have won because we won the appellate round. And I'm going to actually read to you what the decision, so I don't screw it up. The rule against prior restraint does not apply to the publication of a student-operated school newspaper. In the Hazelwood School District v. Kuhlmeier, the Supreme Court upheld a school principal's decision to remove controversial material from the school newspaper. The principal based his decision on the fears on the articles on teen pregnancy and divorce would allow students to identify classmates who encountered such difficulties. One thing I failed to mention to you, though, is in a blurb excerpt to the start of the pregnancy stories, we said we've changed the names of these students to help protect. Kind of an important thing. So that just negated that, right? Justice Byron R. White ruled that the educators did not offend the First Amendment by exercising editorial control so long as their actions are reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns. In essence, it says that the rights of the school students are not necessarily the same as those in the adult settings. A different test applies to censorship by school officials of student expression in a school-sponsored activity such as a student newspaper that was not a public forum for student expression. So they can get by with it. But do you think it would have been different had our attorney mentioned the fact that same topics had already run? What's the difference now? We had consent. We changed their names. They offer essentially a mock trial before you go in to talk to the U.S. Supreme Court because it's a big deal. Miss Edwards said, no, I don't need to do that. Maybe had she done that, she would have gotten out some of those jitters of going before such a grand panel of individuals. Maybe it would have been different. Since losing the case, Miss Edwards lost her practice and has since died. She's gone. And I'm sure it broke her heart. And I think when the decision came out, I really felt like a failure, that I let kids down. And I'm finally better with it because I know that it is still making a difference because kids are standing up despite the justices getting this case wrong. And that goes into showing the anti-Hazelwood laws that are coming out now, that they're not afraid to stand up and still challenge things. I like to talk about Brown versus Board of Education, just because of the fact that it started in Topeka. Ultimately, it brought it back home to where I'm at now. I'm in Springfield, Missouri, to the school my kids are graduating from at Central High School. So I think that's kind of ironic. And I'm going to actually read to you. We've talked about Bethel. Have you guys ever heard the actual speech? And I do this just because I want to compare and contrast, because I think we're pretty tame. We're talking about relevant issues, still relevant now. But in my mind, then and now, I think that Frazier probably was stepping outside the bounds a little bit. But anyhow, his speech is, I think it's humorous, especially if you get the innuendos right in saying this, so I'm gonna try and do my best. I know a man who is firm. He's firm in his pants, he's firm in his shirt, and his character is firm. But most of all, his belief in you, the students of Bethel, is firm. Jeff Kuhlman is a man who takes his point and pounds it in. If necessary, he'll take an issue and nail it to the wall. If he doesn't attack things in spurts, he drives hard, pushing and pushing until finally he succeeds. Jeff is a man who will go to the very end, even the climax, for each and every one of you. So vote for Jeff for student body vice president. He'll never come between you and the best our high school can be. Really? Now, come on, is that not pushing the issue? To me, even as a grown woman, I'm thinking, oh. Frazier, sorry. And then Morris v. Frederick, long hits for Jesus. I agree on that one, that we're probably pushing the issue. I think he was upset about what happened in the background of it, that he got in trouble at school. And because that was the year that the Olympics were going through, ironically right in front of his high school, he wanted to make an embarrassment of that. I think when it comes down to the point of if you want to take a stand on things, you still have to consider other people's rights. And how does that, your message, come across? Are we offending people or not? When we're writing about public issues relevant in your school, really we're not offending anyone, we're stating facts. So that's things in a nutshell on what happened. But in other things that have gone on since then, many years ago I got to take a trip to Indiana State University, and I was talking just like this, except I was on a big podium in front of everybody, and somebody comes up and they're approaching me, and I'm, most of the time I'm still a little airhead, and she's going, oh my God, it's a freedom fighter. I'm looking for her. It's not me. And I still don't think, for me, that I'm anyone different than any of you. I just happen to take a stand on something that I believe in, and I would still do it today. I've been the kind of parent that I've wanted to inspire my kids, that if you challenge something, you believe in something, talk about it. Talk about it, because you may not think one person can make a difference, but you certainly can. So I've wanted to inspire my kids and the kids that I have the privileges to talk to challenge things. Stand up for yourself, because you can make a difference, and you as their teachers can absolutely make a difference in young minds. Not so long ago, I went to University of Missouri, Kansas City, to the law school, and that's where I actually met Mary Beth and John and David for the first time, and that was quite an experience. Other than seeing Mr. Reynolds in court, that was an actual first face-to-face. And we're standing outside in the little area waiting for the shuttle to come pick us up. And I see him, and I'm just standing there, minding my own business. He comes up and hugs me. And I thought, oh dear Jesus, what's happening? Because I'm kind of a little personal space issue, especially to you. And he's telling me, oh, you're such a great kid. Really? Is that why you were like a stalker to me in high school? So we're sitting in this panel, and it was him and I. And it's a good time, and he's telling everybody, all these facts of what he recalls, and I realize he's older, and maybe that's part of the issue. But David, you had nice reactions to it. He said none of it really had anything to do, it was all budgetary, that's why he did it. And then he also said, well, I never actually read the articles. I just made this decision because we didn't have enough money, so let's make those go away. And that's exactly what happened in UMKC. What you guys just did was, huh? But he went on to just say, oh, there was never a problem with you, then why did you threaten to expel me? I mean, all these other things, so I'm like, are you painting this other picture because that's what you see as reality, or is that what you want, you don't remember? So, I mean, I was kind of at a loss for that. I mean, David, do you have comment on that one?
I would just say it was the most poignant, probably the most poignant moment of the entire conference. And you not only had the guts to stand up for yourself back then, but you had the guts to stand up to him at that conference as well, offer a different viewpoint.
So does that mean we have Supreme Court precedent based on an actual non-existent claim? And like what happens then?
Mr. Lawyer?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Well, if this was a money thing and not the substance of the articles.
I think it was the substance of the article.
Okay.
I think that was,
So it was just his revisionist history.
He does, who knows if he actually read them or not. I mean, I would like to think that he did, but, I mean, did he just give a cursory glance to the topic, to the titles of them, and make that decision?
And also Cathy said, well, a budget problem? That's the first I've ever heard that explanation. Then she said, if it was a budget problem, why didn't you bring it to us students? So we could figure out which articles to cut and which pages needed to be taken out to fit the budget.
Give us the opportunity, rather than just wiping it out. Tell us there's that problem, if that was really the case. So I to this day, I don't know. I mean, did he read it? That'll be a question I'll probably go to my grave with. But it was just quite the interesting opportunity in UMKC to have that, because it was a very, very, very big full room. And it was set up like it's a courtroom. So that the students can kind of get the feel for it. It had a balcony full of students and faculty back there, and everybody was just like, what just happened? So that was a good thing, that, you know, at least it puts more question in my mind of what really happened. Maybe he didn't read it, and maybe it was just based upon that he did just see the headlines of it and said that it's too immature.
Can you read a few of the headlines?
Yeah.
Mock-up?
I can. And it's, like I said, you can go out to Google Images and you can find this with my pretty little pregnant self. The main headline was, "Pressure describes it all for today's teenagers," and then the leading article on the pregnancy was, "Pregnancy affects many teens each year." And it gave facts of how many were pregnant throughout the course of years. Classes now, I can see better. Age. Let's see, 1976, total population was 13,669. 77, it rose to 14,762. Give some other numbers. 1980, we're up to 21,000 that quickly. And age 15 and under, it started at 237. And fortunately, I guess though that young, they were kind of figuring out maybe not such a good choice, because that only had gone up to 263. 15 to 17-year-olds in 1976, 1,945 were pregnant. In 1980, 2,976. That's huge. And then 18 to 19-year-olds went from 2,500 to almost 3,800 students. Those are big numbers. Do they have regrets about what they've done? I don't know. All I can say is I'm very fortunate my daughter is not one of those numbers. Teenage marriage faces 75% divorce rate. Runaways and juvenile delinquents are common in large cities, and then divorce's impact on kids may have lifelong effects. One of the quotes that was in there was, "In the beginning, I thought I caused the problem. Now I realize it wasn't me." The kids thought they were the reason for things, and I think they still think those things today. I know for a fact, I can say in my heart, I wasn't the reason my parents divorced. It was his drinking. And my dad just actually passed away 2 months ago. And we never had a good relationship because of the drinking. And when he died, it kind of was a relief, and I hate to say that, but I felt that burden all through my childhood, because as a kid, I was chased around the house with a knife because he was so lit. He almost overturned an ambulance because he had to be picked up because he had also OD'd. And I don't mean to bash my dad, but it created a really hard world for me, and I think that I can say that I've overcome a lot, because I don't have a huge high-paying job or anything, but I'm confident in who I am, and I wanted to be a better mother. So if anything, he taught me be a better parent than what I was to you. And I'm very fortunate to say that so proud of my two children, how successful they're becoming at 17 and 22. And I also have 5 stepkids, so I stay really busy. Really busy. They're moving away though.
When ultimately you told me how it was actually published later on.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, our goal was to get it published, and it really backfired on him because some of the local papers that covered it were the North County Journal, which was a smaller, small paper, and then the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and Globe Democrat covered it. But then USA Today ran it in full. Ha! Right? Take that, Mr. Reynolds.
You still didn't read it.
Could be. Probably above his reading level, maybe. And then I got to write an article when I was in college also for USA Today, so I was really privileged to be able to do that. So now we talked about the anti-Hazelwood, and we're actually up to 10 states. Illinois just passed last week. If you go to the Student Press Law Center out of Washington, D.C. on their website, if you guys are interested, they sell armbands. You can get them for your kids that say anti-Hazelwood. And because I'm a loser, and I was rampantly packing, trying to gather things together Sunday night, I forgot to wear mine, but I usually wear an armband that says Cure Hazelwood. But it's a big deal. And we were active this year. My son actually had the privilege of going to Jeff City, our capital, and we talked to the House of Representatives about it. And he got to, as a student, give his viewpoint of being a student editor.
Can you explain what the anti-Hazelwood laws are?
Yeah. Basically what it does is that it's, so it doesn't limit the students from their speech, in a nutshell. It gives, read it again so I don't screw it up. Anti-Hazelwood laws are being passed in states so far which limit the ability of school officials to censor student media. Anti-Hazelwood mentality makes it so students are afraid to challenge, and this will basically overturn that and give those students their rights. It won't apply to every sector of it. There are exclusions to it to help get it passed in different states that don't have it, but it will open up the rights again for students. And at the end of the day, that's our goal. It worked in North Dakota last year, so that was pretty exciting. I'm making noise now. Okay. So if you would have disagreed with the case in the beginning saying that the students should not have won, based on the facts that I've given you now, talking about that they had previously run and we had consent and we changed the names, would that have made a factor to you? Because we were being responsible? Generally, everyone that had disagreed previously has at that point changed their mind.
Nice. Go ahead. I have a question on this one. All right, I've got a question along those lines about changing names, but not in terms of the people in the article. One thing you said really struck with me, that you were a big girl standing up for something, and I'm just contrasting you then with Reynolds then, and the sort of paternalistic, patronizing way he referred to you as a great kid so many years later. Do you think you being, this was 86, 80 something, right?
It finalized in 88.
Right, so, I mean, not 1950, but not 2016. Do you think if you were, a young man at the time, writing about this, or if Reynolds was a woman, obviously it would depend on the individual, that it would have been received differently, letting the whole possible financial thing aside? Do you think gender things factor into
Possibly a little bit. I don't see that as much as him wanting to not expose the problem of the teen pregnancy rates in the school. I think that probably was struck him as a chord of an embarrassment, because he was, very proper kind of man, and I think he frowned upon that. And he really did not want that public knowledge out there. So I kind of gave you a little idea last night of something I've recently experienced. And this past school year, my son, as I've mentioned, was in journalism, and he wasn't the editor, he was just he was the sports editor of the paper. And Mary Beth has met my child, and he's so much calmer than me. He's really passive, nice kid. Say, Eric, have you done this? Everything's done. He's one of those kids that I don't have to, challenge anything. He's just easy. So he doesn't get worked up about things. He's very level-headed. And he calls me from work, at work, and he says, I can tell in his voice, when your kid calls you and something is just not right in their voice, something's setting them off. And he calls and he says, so maybe there's a problem with our newspaper. And when he gets worked up, he's, blah! And that voice was coming out. And I said, okay, tell me what happened. And he said, well, Mrs. Culp, she is the new advisor. And he said, there's a problem with her. And I said, okay, fine. What happened? And he said, well, you know how we have always talked about the game Assassins? And anybody familiar with what that game is? Water gun fight? In Springfield, it's not allowed on campus. It has to be something that happens off campus. And it has gone on, it has been a tradition for like years, and I mean years, because Central is the oldest school in Springfield, dating way, way back. So and every year that they write this story, because they give you the facts of this is how you play, this is what it's going to cost, this is where you can do it, and this is the rules of the game. All that it said. Mrs. Culp says, we're not going to run that because that promotes violence. And Eric was like, what? So he challenges this. And I'm like, okay. So she's not happy. And as he's calling me, I'm like listening very intently on it, but yet she wants to run these other stories that are, the one particular that he struggled with was they were talking about the wrestling team and how to excessively drop weight so you can make your weight class. They were giving the kids the facts on how to drop weight. Now, to me as a mother, I'm thinking you're just promoting an unhealthy lifestyle. That's more of an issue than telling you how to play Assassins with your water gun. So he's wound up. So I'm like, okay, we talk about it a little bit more at home. And the next day I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to call her. I said, because I understand as an adult that there's two sides to every story. Right, Mr. Reynolds, whatever his story really is, did he read it, did he not? But I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to talk to her. And I call her in the afternoon, and I introduced myself, and I said, I'm Eric Cowan's mother. She says, I know exactly who you are.
That's a good start.
Okay, and I know who you are. The advisor that had just left, Mrs. Gardner, she'd been there forever. And that the news magazine at Central High School is a magnificent piece of work, or had been, and it had won every major award that's out there for when they go to state competitions. It's a big deal. And I had always gone and talked to her classes. I've gone to the Lib and Law classes, which are, I guess, your Constitution kind of classes here, which is a requirement to pass in Missouri before you can wear your cap and gown. So I'd always gone and talked to these classes, and it always been good, and I had emailed this woman earlier in the year to introduce myself and, say, I've gone and talked to her. Mrs. Gardner had also said, Cathy always comes and talks to us, and it's a pretty big honor for the kids to get to hear her because it's relevant. And she goes, well, what exactly do you think is relevant about what you have to say? And I'm like, well, she kind of threw me for a loop by that, because I'm like, well, the case is in the kids' books. You talk about it. Oh, wait, here's this other important fact. My kid's in your class. That might bring a little relevancy about what I'm about to tell you. So I said, well, my son is upset about something that's happened in the classroom, and I said I would just like to discuss it with you. And she says, well, what happens in this classroom isn't your business. And I said, well, then let me remind you again, my child is in your class, therefore your class is my business. And she said, well, just because you are in a landmark case doesn't mean that I have anything that I really need to discuss with you. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. Okay, so when I got on the phone with her initially, she didn't answer the phone, a student answered the phone, and I thought, I kind of recognized that voice. And the more that I thought about it, it was my son. So he was staying after class to work on a deadline. And Mrs. Culp, as I'm asking her questions about why did this happen? Why did you not run the article on assassins, but you chose to run it on dropping weight? She said, well, it promotes violence and that's just ridiculous. And I said, well, do you understand the game? Do you really understand what's going on? And she just proceeded, the voice got higher and higher and higher. And I'm wondering, is my child still in the class? Because at this point, she is screaming at me on the phone. You think that went over well with Mama? Mm-mm. So I wasn't pleased with any of that, and she just proceeded to screech back at me. And when I get really angry or kind of worked up, I just get really even keel. And the lady that sits in the cube next to me, she's going, I knew something bad was happening. She said, I could hear it in your voice. And she said, I knew it was a teacher and your kid was around. Because I'm very bad at Mama Bear. You guys have kids and the Mama Bear comes out of you. It's not a pretty thing, guys. Back away. So she is ranting and carrying on about that it's not my business. And I said, well, explain to me something. I said, because as a student, I said, my teacher would go to bat for us. And he would have gone to the point of losing his job if he felt that he would support us through something. And I said, so what exactly would you do if it came down to the point that you chose to support the students on this and administration said no? I said, would you go to bat for them? She said, I don't know what you mean by go to bat. And I said, well, let me try rephrasing this in a different language for you. If it comes down to the fact that it's you against administration, are you going to back down? She said, well, I'm not going to lose my job for these kids. Okay, I understand what kind of journalism teacher you are. She said, well, I used to be a professional journalist. And I said, well, then you of all people should understand what it's like to support your staff. These kids are working hard for you. Their grade is based upon you and your judgment of what they're doing. So I finally go, I think we're probably finished because we weren't making any headway. So I called the school back and I got one of the principals. And I said, I want you to understand something that's going on. And I said, I think you have an issue. I said, your paper is being censored by your journalism advisor that is doing it really without good basis. I said, I don't believe that she understands what censorship is. I said, and oh, by the way, she's screeching at me on the phone in front of my child in the classroom. He was like, oh boy. He goes, I'm sorry. That's all that I can say. He said, I will definitely investigate this. So Eric is pretty worked up by the time I get home that night. And I said, what do you want to do? He goes, well, can you talk to their parents because the kids are scared. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, the kids are worried about things. So I said, okay, we'll just let it go. The next day she calls in sick. But okay, maybe she's worried about what's going on. But she ends up showing up for school. And I don't know if that's something that she was supposed to do or not, but she came specifically for this block only. She gets all the kids in the classroom and she says, all of you take your electronics and you put it up here on the counter, turn everything off. You're not to touch it. And she proceeds to break out this list, the anonymous type letter like we had. And this just parallels so much of what happened in my case that it was amazing. She threatened the class as a whole that if you continue to push this issue, I will take all of your grades and fail all of you. Any college letters of recommendation that I've written for you, I will revoke them. She's scaring the tar out of these kids. And these are hardworking kids. One kid, I mean, she had just written a letter and sent it off, and this kid's getting a massive scholarship to go be a journalist. But yet, because she's afraid because I'm challenging things, what's going to happen to her? Forget the kids, which is what her job is. Forget them. So all of this happens, and Eric is really wound up at this point. He's like, Mom, she goes, they're not going to let us be on staff next year if we pursue this? And I'm like, they can't do this. They cannot punish you as a class. That's not okay. So once again, the next morning, I called the principal again, and I said, hi, guess who? And he said, uh-oh. He said, kind of assuming maybe something else happened. I said, you got a piece of paper? I said, I'm gonna give you a list. Because we sat down, Eric and I, and we detailed every single thing that happened that night, and we filled 8 pages of details that went behind all of the comments that were made. And so he decides, I think you're right, I think we have an issue. So he says, here's what I'm gonna do. He said, I can't disclose any facts, exactly what's going to happen to her, but there will be some kind of disciplinary action taken against her. And they took it very seriously, because I told him, I said, if something doesn't get resolved and she stopped making the threats to these students, I said, I happen to know the director of the Student Press Law Center in Washington, D.C. I've already talked to him. So if you want to pursue this further, let me know. Because I happen to be going to St. Louis in a few weeks where he's going to be. I said, we'll just continue the conversation there. If we need to file suit based on this, don't think that we won't. They didn't end up ever running the articles, but we did get a full apology on it. No students failed the class. Nothing else was done further on revocation of letters. But because Eric was not afraid to challenge things and to let me know, to communicate, it had different outcomes. She also told the kids, don't talk to your parents about this. My child can tell me anything under the world that he wants to. I am his advocate, and I will always be my children's advocate. That I don't want them to ever feel afraid. So I will always speak up on their behalf. It was just amazing to me, after having gone through everything that I did, to see him in the same situation. I thought, by God as my witness, we are not going down this path again, but I'm not afraid to if that's where we have to be. So things like that happen continually. I went to one of our sister schools in the district, and a teacher wanted to run an article about the problem of drug use in the classrooms. And when I was talking to the students, they were telling me about how they were finding spent needles in the class. Pretty serious issue. Teacher or administration would not allow them to run the articles. They were more concerned with students wearing lanyards and to identify them as students. So that article took precedence over the drug use to identify that issue. Teacher was told that if she were to pursue running the articles on drug use, she would lose her job. So it happens everywhere. It happens all the time, unfortunately. But it's things like anti-Hazelwood that will hopefully overturn this and give that sense of confidence back to the students and back to the administration. And hopefully that will get us on a better course for our kids. Because if we don't let the kids know and send that message to them that we as adults support them, where's our society going? And really, if you stop and think about it, I know you guys all have great kids in your classroom, and some of them you're wishing maybe you could steer them to another path. Do so. Inspire them. Find something that clicks, because deep down in everybody, there's something that they're passionate about. I told you guys last night about the issues with my son and being able to eat properly. It doesn't matter the issue. I was passionate about making sure that he thrived. I won the fight over the type of bottle to use. My daughter, in her junior year of high school, developed epilepsy, up and out of the blue. We were on our way to my son's ball game and got out of the car, and she had a 6-minute seizure. First time ever in her life. I thought my child was going to die in a parking lot in Arkansas at a ball field, because she looked like she was having a stroke, and it was a bad thing. And through the course of all this, she ends up with a 504 plan. Do you guys have that? Okay, same across everywhere. She has a 504 plan to accommodate her because she is having absent seizures. And it's not a constant thing that she's happening. We're fortunate on that. Their seizures are pretty controlled. But through her junior year of college, she lost the ability to hear a lecture and remember. She couldn't remember anything. So we had to start a relearning process through therapies of how to hear and get the notes down. But it was because, again, mom with the big mouth, being an advocate for my kid, to stand up to the administration and go, here's a medical problem. We need to look at this as a problem, because if you look at her past grades, she's not a bad student. It's not a matter of she started drinking and doing drugs and just tired of college. That's not it. Something here is not working. She graduated last year, pulled it out with honors. Or in May, she graduated with honors from college. She has a Bachelor of Science with Hospitality and Restaurant Management. Think I'm not a proud mama? Very much so. I'm so inspired by her that she can do that. Don't make me teary. I love my babies. But it's anything like that, you know, all of you I know are passionate about teaching. That's why you're here. Just make a difference in your kids' lives. Encourage them to stand up and want to continue to make a difference in our world, and hopefully we can maybe get our kids and our world on a better path. That's all.
What happened to Sturgis? Was he around for your fight, or?
He would poke back in once in a while. We're Facebook friends. And it's kind of nice to see encouraging words from him, that I'm so proud of you for still continuing to pursue that. And the kids that were in high school were kind of, you know, the mean kids towards me. I've gotten a lot of apologies over the years now through the grace of Facebook, saying I would have never done that. I guess I didn't have the courage to do what you did. And thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking a stand for us as kids. And I think as we get older, we realize things differently. We see things differently, or at least hopefully. And at the end of the day, it's just I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help the Reggie Joneses of our town. Anybody else? David?
You mentioned about Leslie Edwards. You said she lost her law practice. Was there ever an attempt by anyone to try to get somebody else to handle that case, and she resisted it, or? And then the other thing is, do you know how she lost her law practice?
I don't know for sure, since I was away at college. You know, and at that point, like I said, we didn't have cell phones, and it was long distance bills, and she didn't want to pay those. So I don't know for sure if there was an attempt to ever boot her. And I think the reason she lost her practice is because once word gets out that you fail at something to that degree, you're not getting a whole lot of other clientele.
And this might be geared towards David too, I don't know.
If it's hard, yes.
So I don't want to put you on the spot, but we had talked earlier about how Tinker had been chipped away with different exceptions, and that was a win. With Hazelwood, even though it was a loss, has there been things that have chipped away to actually pull up the student rights in terms of the press? I know it was a school-sponsored activity, bubble, and that was the reasoning. But has there been any cases since '88 that have actually pulled up that gave kids that expanded their rights?
Well, I think the movement that Cathy and Mary Beth are on, the anti-Hazelwood movement, is certainly one to increase the number of states that where you have extra statutory protections. And those statutes really say, at least several of them say, you have to incorporate the Tinker standard, right? So that's one thing. And then there are some cases that come out. The one that comes to mind to me is the Katie Dean case out of Michigan, where she reported about the dangers of bus fumes in the community. And that federal district court judge there really seemed to recognize the rights of student journalists to speak out on stuff. And even under the Hazelwood standard, right, the actions of the school officials are still supposed to be reasonable. And so there have been some court decisions where the courts have said this is unreasonable, right? They still have to meet a standard of reasonableness.
The way that the New Voices Act reads, and I'll tell you this one again, Walter Cronkite New Voices Act of Missouri is House Bill 2058, is a movement to guarantee student journalists in the state the freedom to report without fear of consequence. Currently, there is no added protection against administrative censorship for high school or college journalists and their advisors, leaving them vulnerable to censorship for simply reporting the truth. This came out a week after the issue at Mizzou. You guys are familiar with Professor Click? It came out right after that. It's being sponsored in the House by Senator Elijah Har, or Representative Elijah Har out of Springfield, where I'm at. I had seen something where the action was kind of starting, and I sent him a message and said, hey, I happen to know a little bit about Hazelwood, and I also live in Springfield. So he was like, are you freaking kidding me? Because you're the person. I said, yeah, sort of, kind of. So I've been able to partner with him, and it's stalled in the Senate because there were some other more important issues than freedom of speech. happening in Missouri presently, so it's stalled, but it will be reactivated for certain at the next session start.
Cathy, you spoke about that you weren't the only other litigant of your case, so I'm just curious what happened to your co-litigants, if they actually endured the same scrutiny from your principal that you did, if they faced anything similar to what you did.
I don't think to the same degree. With Leanne being a senior, she was able to get away from it. She will sometimes go out and speak, and I think we've spoken together twice in all these years. Leslie, we were both juniors at the time, and she got a little bit of grief over it, not to the degree that I did. And I think it goes back to my name being one that's out there on it. Haven't actually seen her since graduation. So, and I've tried to find her, and yeah, I'm a stalker. She's nowhere around, so I don't know, and that's why you can track me down. Like I said, I don't have fun things to sign like Mary Beth and John do, but you can find the little on Google Images, the printout of it that's got the actual spread of the paper. You can also, I do Skype also, so you can find me through Facebook at Cathy Kuhlmeier Fry, because my husband likes to make sure I put the fry on the end of it. But I don't consider myself a superhero by any means. It was just a humbling experience for me to be able to get out and do this. I'm not going. And I just feel privileged that I can come out and talk about my experiences and hopefully inspire students and faculty to take a stand on things. Yes, sir.
So I know you and Tinkers and David, you go out and around the country and you talk to educators, teachers. Have you ever spoken to a group of principals and superintendents? And if you have, what was their reaction like?
I think they probably have been mixed in the crowds. Towards the end of this past school year, I went to another sistering school in the area, and I was reading the speech on Fraser, and it's a group of journalism students, and it was the advisor and the principal. I had to have permission because it was one of the kids that I knew had asked me to come. She told her teacher, I know this lady, and he was like, no way. And he was like, yeah, she lives down here. So I had to get his approval, and then the principal's approval, and then through the board, their approval to go and talk to them. And as I'm talking to him and I'm reading the speech, he goes, that's enough, we can't talk about that. I was like, really? Okay. So I had to stop that. But I think probably there have been some in the crowds, and it's not like they're willing to generally identify themselves. But I think really throughout the course of the years, I think fortunately that the mindset has changed on the decision of the courts, and I think they're realizing that maybe they didn't get it quite right. Because hearing so many people now, they're all very supportive of us as students rather than the administration. So to me, that's a good sign that our times are changing, that we are willing to allow our students and administration more rights. And ideally, that's where we need to be going with this. Anything else?